I'm joined now by Dr. Jeff Khloa, the Chief Curating Officer at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. Always great to have Jeff with us. And Jeff, I know I had a great visit with you in Washington. We saw some of that footage last month in our webinar. And since that point, you lectured for us on a Journeys of Paul program. So I certainly hope that went well.
Yeah, well, great to be with you again, James, and come back anytime. And of course, it's always a great joy, privilege to go see these places that Paul taught and ministered, to go to Ephesus and Corinth. It's just amazing sights and so much to see there. So thanks for that opportunity as well.
So Jeff, we're actually here to talk about archaeology today and staying abreast on some of the new developments in archaeology and particularly biblical archaeology. So why is it important for the clergy and congregants to stay abreast of the developments in this field?
Well, archaeology in general helps gives texture and really tangible records of what we see in the biblical descriptions, the locations, the places, and things like everyday life. So what archaeology helps us get is a deeper understanding of the descriptions in the text, how things are working. And archaeology doesn't answer all the questions, but it does help clarify things as we go along. What, for example, this find of a comb, ivory comb from 1700 BC, just recently, which has Semitic lettering on it. Okay, in itself, it's not a huge game changer, but it does show that there's an alphabet much like Hebrew, 1700 BC, before the time of Moses, and it just shows that there's a basis behind some of the claims made in the biblical texts.
Now, for a layman like me, I read Israeli papers and things, so I'm not maybe your normal person, but for sure, I'm seeing different finds here. There were 4 swords found in a cave, like last week. So, what's been the emphasis of archaeologists, in Israel and the surrounding countries here in the recent years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those finds of the swords, by the way, was incredible. I had a little sneak peek of those in my last meeting there. But the Dead Sea Caves, in particular, and the Dead Sea Scrolls have been a particular interest. Partly, the archaeologists wanted to go through all the caves and make sure that they had found everything. They wanted to make sure it was all documented and to avoid future looting, of course. So there's still finds to be published from that. And we look forward to seeing, what other things they found. Obviously, swords are pretty interesting and good for the cameras, and they're in amazing shape. It was incredible. But also, part of the focus now is because we have new scientific tools and methods, scholars and archaeologists can re-examine questions and re-examine materials that were found even years ago and answer new questions. For example, with the Dead Sea Scrolls, some interesting technology on DNA testing the parchment, and apparently finding out that these were farmed gazelles. They're not just wild animals they're killing, but they're actually intentionally farming these animals to produce the scrolls, which again gives an indication of their importance and some kind of intentional effort. Things like multispectral imaging that allows text that previously had not been able to be read to be examined. So in many ways, there's both the new finds, which are always very appealing, but in some ways kind of random, but then also going back, and as you find more items, more archaeology, you understand the context better, and you can go back and re-examine old materials and come to even sharper conclusions. So it's a combination of, fascinating discoveries like swords and just the painstaking work of going back over the data and representing it, coming to sharper understandings.
Now, oftentimes we think of the Dead Sea Scrolls, there at the Israel Museum, and having been found 70 years ago, but they're still finding fragments in those caves, correct?
Yeah. Well, hopefully they found them all now. There was a find about what, a year and a half ago, maybe, some fragments from the Engedi caves, the Nahal Hever cave, and so they hope that that's it. Now, they were Greek fragments; they weren't Hebrew, and it was roughly, a typewriter size page of paper, or printer size page of paper these days, I guess. So not a lot, but again, the goal has been to make sure that they have everything, and I'd say again, just as important to make sure that they understand what they have fully, which is a never-ending process.
Wow, that's really exciting. So if you had to put, pick your top three developments in archaeology and studying manuscripts, what would those be?
Well, I'll start with, what's fascinating is always the Jerusalem excavations. It's amazing what they continue to find there. Everything from, additional inscriptions. I mentioned Hezekiah with the water tunnel there that we already knew about, but additional inscriptions, bullae and seals that they find on site. I know it's a somewhat controversial, challenging excavation, but the knowledge being gained is really phenomenal, and that's ongoing work. So that's always an important project, and new finds come out there constantly. Um, uh, I will say that I think the Al Raj excavation is still pretty exciting. Of course, the museum sponsors that, so I'm a little biased.
Hmm.
But the question of where Bethsaida actually was located is an open question. But I think as another season is in the books, it's becoming all the more clear that that's the site. It was a village that became a city, a polis, in the Roman period, and a church was located there from the Byzantine period. They're hoping to find an earlier church on the next layer down, and to be able to identify, firmly where Bethsaida was located, the home of Peter and Andrew, and where Jesus certainly was. Now, that's a pretty exciting development. And to get a better understanding of the relation to the Sea of Galilee, what the economy was like, the fishing, all those kinds of things, just again adds more texture and background to what we know from the Gospels. So that's an exciting one. And my background academically is manuscripts, so I have to say something about both the Dead Sea Scrolls and what they're finding there with the new scientific methods, and places like Mount Sinai and others. Mount Athos, continuing project there to do the digitizing, and Palimpsest project. So scholars went in the 19th century and found these places early 20th century, and here we are a couple hundred years later and still finding new materials in those places. So that's always exciting. Just have more data, more evidence.
Right. Going back to Bethsaida, just because I know a lot of our travelers have been to the other Bethsaida, I
Right.
guess we'll say. When do you think the El Araj Bethsaida site, when do you see that opening for mainstream tourism?
Well, I've heard, I have a meeting next week to hear more about that actually, and what that might look like. I know that they want to do at least two or three more seasons of excavation. There's still more questions to answer, like, is there a church beneath the one that they found? They want to do more to identify the Roman city and other elements of it. They found quite a bit already, but to just firm things up and other aspects of what that city was like. So I'd guess it's several years before it will be fully developed as a place that tourists can just kind of go to. I will say though, if people go on the Museum of the Bible Educational Opportunities tour in May, they will be able to go to the site and listen to Mati Aviam, the archaeologist there, talk about the site. He's a great guy, very engaging, and it's exciting to hear from an archaeologist about what they're finding and what the process is. So um, yeah, that's it's pretty cool to be able to go to kind of an undeveloped site,
It is.
and before it's turned into kind of a tourist site. So whether you go this year or go in 5 years, it'll be a pretty cool place to go.
So how have these developments, how are they changing our understanding of the Bible and the events and and our understanding of the people in the Bible?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if change is the right word. Um, uh, it's not like, oh, this proves that, or it doesn't prove that, or disproves that. We have a pretty good idea. And after, really 150 years of scientific excavations, we have a pretty good idea of what's there, especially in Israel and some of the, the Roman cities like Corinth or Ephesus
Mhm.
or Athens. But we're constantly having that knowledge refined, getting a better sense of what daily life was like, what the economy was like, even during the period when the Southern Kingdom, Judah, was under different empires, under Assyria, Babylon, even what the taxation system was like. Archaeologists have been able to figure out from the seals on clay jars that were used to gather taxes what the system was, even how much tax was paid to, say, the Persians or the Babylonians, right? So it doesn't change things, but it does give us a clear sense of how things worked. You might say, kind of in the background, the setting for what's being described in the biblical texts. So it really does give you a 3D view, and sometimes even a very granular view of what life was like in the background for these events.
So would you say that, I mean, we tend to, I think of, oh, it was so much different back in those days, but in a lot of ways, it wasn't a whole lot different. I mean, it seems like we know so much more, as you said, about diet and
Hmm.
taxes and things. It was still life, so somewhat like we know it now.
Yeah, I really, I think we get this picture of people living in mud huts, but the Romans had heated baths, right? Heated floors and walls. I mean, you pay a lot of money for that today, right? And they had
Right.
it; it's part of their public buildings. Even our exhibit here in the Museum of the Bible, you have perfume holders, you have mascara, you have jewelry. I mean, people are people. They have the same kind of interests, the same concerns. I don't know if you saw the news even just a couple of weeks ago. One of our scholars, Mike Holmes, published a fragment with some sayings of Jesus from probably the second century, and the sayings were basically about worry and care, right? And it's a very fragmentary text. We don't know exactly what it's about, but people were worried about day-to-day living in the second century, and of course in Jesus' ministry. So recognizing that the kinds of questions and concerns people have today are the same questions that people had, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and these are the questions that the texts of the Bible are addressing as well. So it connects us to those people from long ago, and gives us a sense of how we've dealt with these questions for generations and generations.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I was just thinking I have to make a presentation about the journeys of Paul on Sunday afternoon,
Mm,
and just thinking about like the terrace houses in Ephesus, and I know you were just there.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'd move into one of those houses right now. I mean,
Well, that's how one half of the 1% lived. Okay, that's
right?
like I
Yeah,
would not have
no, it
lived there.
wasn't
I don't know, maybe
everybody, of
you would,
course.
but yeah, right. Yeah, but it's
So,
pretty cool. And there was definitely the us and them, in the Roman period, and even First Corinthians talks about this. Not many of you were wealthy, right? When you came to faith. So, but some people were, and that creates tension in communities, right? So you see the same kind of dynamics that you'll often see in life today.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, I guess a bonus question here. You and I talked a little bit about, but I don't think we had it on camera when I was in Washington. But I know the museum is trying to bring a mosaic floor that's
Hmm.
under the jail near the Megiddo
Yeah.
archaeological site to Washington. And I read that was in the news, in the
Right.
Israeli news, in the last couple weeks. So tell us a little bit about that. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and I can't say officially yet. We're waiting on one more internal approval over in Israel, but hopefully we can announce something soon. But it's a remarkable discovery. It was a salvage excavation. They were expanding a prison outside of Megiddo. You can actually see it as you drive to Megiddo. It's on the main road.
Right.
And they discovered a fort, a Roman fort from the second, third century. and a village connected to it, which was a diverse village. It had Samaritans, Jews, Christians, pagans in the village. And inside one of the buildings, they found what they're calling a prayer hall. So it has a floor, mosaic floor, with three dedications. One of them is for women dedicating a mosaic for one part of the worship space. One mosaic is a dedication by a Roman centurion who dedicates the floor. And then one inscription, the most significant probably, is by a woman named Akeptus, who dedicates the altar, which they found the base of in the center of the room, the altar to, the inscription says, the God Jesus Christ. So that's a pretty important inscription. The archaeologists date the prayer hall to about the first quarter of the 3rd century, so about 100 years before Christianity is legal in the Roman Empire. Although, we knew there was not widespread persecution, so it's not surprising. But if the dating is accurate and correct, which, there's coins and other elements, the history of the legion in that area seems to be true. It's the oldest known Christian worship space ever discovered. And the elements that we find in liturgical texts from the 2nd, 3rd century, like the altar, the table for the Eucharist, the inscriptions and the dedications to Jesus being worshipped as a god. So it's a remarkably important discovery. And it seems that the mosaic cannot stay in that site because the prison needs to expand. It'll take too long, and the site can't really be developed for tourism. So like they did with the Laud mosaics, if you're familiar with those, they conserved them and sent them on a traveling exhibit for a number of years, and now they're on permanent display in Israel. And that seems to be the plan at this point, and we'd be honored to be one of the museums that would host those. So stay tuned for announcements.
Yeah, well, that's really exciting, and I've sort of kept up with that find over the years. So it's exciting that it's progressed to that level, and yeah, it's just a testimony to Christian worship, that far in the past. So, any other sites that we should keep on our radar?
That's a good question. I'd say Jerusalem and El Araj are the two big ones right now. There was, and again, I'll just say because I'm quite familiar with it, at Tel Shimron, which is another site we sponsor. They found an intact arch this season, which is not connected to the biblical accounts. It seems to be the first half of the 2nd millennium BC, so 1750 BC perhaps. But it seems that Tel Shimron, which was, let me just explain the biblical connection. It's the only unexcavated Galilean site from the Roman period. So they're not expecting to find anything major. It's not mentioned in the New Testament, so it's not a hugely important place. But again, to help us understand better the context. But in the course of the excavations, they discovered that apparently this was a major city in the Canaanite period, and we'll continue to see what they can find there. So very unusual. In fact, the only one found ever in Israel. Canaanite period vaulted arch, which is still intact. So they didn't want to go too deep because they don't know if it's going to collapse. So it'll be curious to see what they continue to find there.
Wow, that's interesting. And of course, there's great debate around, was King David real, and the whole Canaanite civilization. So that will certainly prove to be an exciting site. Jeff, we really want to thank you for spending some time with us today and bringing us up to speed on the latest developments in biblical archaeology and ancient manuscripts. We really appreciate your work there and leadership of your incredible team doing so much incredible work in those fields. So again, appreciate what you do, and I hope everyone has a chance to make it to the Museum of the Bible soon.
All right, and thanks, James, and hope people get a chance to go with you to Israel or the Journeys of Paul. It's a great experience.
Good, thank you.